Peace kings, peace queens, back again with hour 8 of the Amduat in our book, the Thesis. As represented by the upper and lower register in Seti I, the sun god passes through 10 circles of the hidden gods who are on their sands. Sand suggests the hydrophobic interior base pair of DNA, while the 10 circles indicate the ability of the portal protein to form oligomeric rings after the DNA translocation machine pumps the concatemer viral DNA into the procapsid in an ATP-dependent manner. This ability has been observed in phages T3, T4, lambda, and SPP1. Portal rings form from unassembled subunits and can fully surround DNA in a non-specific manner. The translocation machine. The middle register presents the boat of the sun god, who is canopied by the serpent Mahin and towed over sand by 8 gods, a representation of the translocation machine that pumps the concatemer viral DNA into the procapsid. Budge's SI text reads 9 gods, although his drawing depicts 8, as does Pinakar's version from RVI. The SI text encourages Ra to unite to the sepulchres of Kinti Amenti and the 8 gods who told him. These 8 gods may represent the translocation machine of lambda DNA terminase, an enzyme that cleaves virion length chromosomes from the concatemer and packages them into the lambda head. Researchers are still investigating the structure of the 2 subunit enzyme, especially the smaller subunit, which has been shown to have a hydrophobic domain. Besides having a highly hydrophobic or sand region, other support for the 8 gods representing terminase includes recent evidence from researchers who solubized the protein to discover 8 discrete protein bands. However, the 8 gods may also represent the structural proteins that form the base plate for tail assembly. At this point in the infection, the 8 towing gods could reflect either signification, although the enzyme terminase seems more likely. The translocation activity of terminase is important because the DNA must be pumped up a steep thermodynamic gradient into the capsid. After the concatemer is formed in phage lambda, the packaging process begins. The protein terminase cuts the DNA, staying with the DNA after the cutting, which then enters the empty prohead shell. The terminase then makes the second cut, binds to the DNA past the cut site, and forms a new terminase DNA complex to find another prohead and repeat the process. Portal proteins sitting on one of the 5-fold symmetric vertices or corners of the icosahedral capsid provide the hole throughout which the DNA enters the prohead. Packaging RNA is also a chaperone molecule in this process. Next in the middle head assembly. Next in the middle register are 9 large objects called followers or servants, which could represent phage tails. These objects look similar to previous scepters in hour 6, except now there's a head hanging from the curved end. As mentioned, The translation from Hour 6 relating to his scepters states that their souls shall rise up in the duat on their scepters. They are provided with knives. Knives, of course, indicate the electrostatic force of DNA, whereas forked scepters have been decoded as replication forks. The symbolism of the scepter points to the creative act of Genesis. Related to this, the linen base, related to this, the linen bandage form in front of each, suggests weaving or the construction of a web of life, a wrapping or folding of protein, a packaging of DNA. The SI text in Hour 8 reads, the scepters have their life in them, in their heads, in their forms, suggesting that these scepters, which look like phage heads with tails, are coming to life. Their work is to seize rise enemies and then make their head pass under their swords after the god is gone. The RVI plate depict these tailed heads with beards. The symbol of linen bandages is placed before each scepter form in each of the four rams. The four rams may signify the four distinct structural domains of the smaller terminae subunit when partially folded. The Seti I text states that when the sun god passes by, they receive the diadems of Ra, and the soul of Tahinan uniteth itself to the earth. The ram is an essential component of divinity, as indicated by the ever-present ram horns of the deceased and other deities. The ram-headed sun god represents a hydrogen supermolecule, which enables reactions and opens the door to change. Investigating the 5 circles in the upper register and 5 circles in the lower register, we observe deities on and off weaving instruments. The upper register circle depicts 12 deities on weaving instruments, whereas the lower register circles depict 8 bearded mummified gods off weaving instruments and 4 gods sitting on weaving instruments. These ideograms may point to the idea that full function of weaving of DNA is not occurring due to the early stage process relating to the rising production of crow-protein. The text also states that those in the picture reflect the mystery-rich horse, the heir, the young god made. So we can be assured that the suggestion in the same portion of the DNA is being woven and assembled for the horse species. In the middle register, the scepter with bearded heads at the end suggests head assembly is in progress with DNA packing, represented by the translocation machine terminates. That is, the 8 gods towing the sun god along the path. The text states that they have their swathing before them in the form in which the god himself had them. The knife-like objects on the scepters represent the DNA electrostatic force. Phage lambda chromosomes are processively packaged into performed shells using end-to-end multi-timers of intracellular viral DNA as the packaging substrate. To understand this process, it may be helpful to review the structure of the bacteriophage 529 DNA packaging motor, which translocates dsDNA into performed proheads of bacteria viruses. Using X-ray crystallography, researchers determined the structure of the head-tail connector, indicating the pro-head plus deuterosameric connector pro-head RNA file ATP, ASE, and DNA comprise a rotary motor with the head pro-head RNA ATP ASE complex acting as a stator, the DNA acting as a spindle, and the connector as a ball race. So it seems that this packaging activity in our DNA spindle is a fair match to the 9 followers on DNA weaving instruments with heads hanging from curved connectors on spindle legs. Text from Ramesses VI. The text states that Ra is towing along in his form as enveloper. Lambda DNA packaging can be considered as enveloping because during packaging, the coat proteins surround a scaffolding protein core. However, some phage have an exterior protein envelope, which also may be indicated here. The text relating to the 9 signs or the followers with heads hanging from curved connectors state that their clothing is that of the god himself, Ra, and that when Ra calls to them, they become alive, and their heads come out of their knives. Then they swallow their heads when the god passes by. Ra's clothing is made from his DNA. That is, the words of electrolytic message that is replicated and translated to protein for phage head and tail assembly.